this event. So thank you everybody for coming here. Thank you for waiting for in the pre-show. We will have some more people come up eventually. So that's my general welcome to everybody and welcome to Dr. Mireles for being here. I know that this is a tour for you, so
Yeah.
this must be exhausting. So I do appreciate you making the time to
Well,
come
I
here and talk
appreciate
to
all of you
us.
all coming. I mean,
Yeah.
seriously. Yeah.
But for many of you, this may be the first Platypus event, so I just want to introduce what the society does. And so I'm going to read some about the Platypus Affiliated Society. The Platypus Affiliated Society, established in December of 2006, organizes reading groups, public fora, research, and journalism focused on problems and tasks inherited from the old 1920s to 30s, new 1960s to 70s, and post-political 1980s to 90s left for the possibilities of emancipatory politics today. And some of the things that we are doing right now is, for example, on Tuesdays, we have a social that is organized by our member June, who's not here, but she organizes it, I believe, at 7 in the student union. So if you want to come, that's completely free. We don't have a set agenda. You just come, talk about politics, history, everything that is happening today. That's sort of it's our way to talk to the left. Like we want to host that conversation right there. On Fridays, we have our main reading group. It's a Marxist reading group. We put a lot of emphasis in history, the history of the left. We curate that. And that is happening normally on Fridays at 7 p.m. on RLP. That's here in the university. RLP is 0.124. And I believe this week we may move it sometime on the weekend because our main pedagogue, Evie, who's not here either, uh, um, it's unable to do it this week. But nonetheless, the topic of this week is going to be gender and sexuality. And that usually starts at 6 to 9. So we hope to see you there. If you have any questions about the Platypus Society, you can always find me in this building working. I work 9 to 6. And if you have any more questions or if you want to sign up for our new mailing list, there's some pamphlets over there with a QR code that you can scan and you will get notifications of all the work we're doing. Like I said, we have a Immigration on the Left panel coming up in October. We're gonna have someone from the Raza Party, it seems, and some other left organizations. We host the conversation of the left. We want them to speak to each other and speak to the public. So today we have a public interview. So the way that it works is I'm basically gonna talk with Dr. Mireles. I have prepared a few questions. I'm gonna try not to, just leave it at here. And then after those 10 questions, which may have a few smaller questions in between, we'll open it to the public for you to ask your own questions. Um, and and yeah, that is it. So thank you again for coming, Dr. Mireles. And I think a lot of my fascination with the Raza Unida Party, it's because it's a new left organization that happened in the 60s and 70s. It really got strong right there at the end of the 60s into the 70s. And it politicized a lot of Mexican Americans that would not have been political otherwise.
Yeah.
And but what does it mean to reach back to the new left, to an organization that you can say failed, that stopped being, but I guess for grounding all my questions today is the what it was, what it is today, and what it should be.
Okay.
So I guess one way to start all that is just for you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah.
Personally, and more specifically, we want to know how you came to the left and to the Raza Unida Party.
Well, I mean, I grew up in Michigan. I was born in a small town in southeast Michigan called Charlotte, Michigan. My mother is white. She comes from somewhat of a affluent background. Her parents were landowners and, they had apartment buildings and all that other kind of stuff. Um, but my mother was definitely a child of the 60s. And so,
How so?
well, I mean, the people that she chose to have children with and, and share her life with, right? My mother met my father when she was 16. And my dad is like hardcore Mexicano Chicano from, Westlake, right? And they were farm workers um on the migrant trail. His family, his dad used to cross the border frequently in the early part of the 20th century. Um and they would come over to work. Uh and they eventually settled in Westlake, my grandma and grandpa. But the majority of my uncles and aunts were born in Mexico. The younger children, which is my father is one of them, were born on this side of the border. Um, and so, I mean, really what you have are these two very, very, very different worlds that collide, when these guys are 16. Um, and my mom had me when she was 17. And that was in 1966, which is always really interesting to me because I know that I don't think that there at that time, the time that I was born, that there was such a stigma around teenage motherhood, right? Maybe a good thing, maybe a bad thing, right? But it's certainly the way that it's developed now. I mean, it's like if you have a baby, your life's over. Um, and so I they were married on and off for a while. But my dad left when I was about 5. And
Your Chicano dad.
my Mexican dad. He left. And I had a stepfather who raised me, who was black. And he was from Nashville, Tennessee. And so
Was he also a new left kind of person?
no, none of the people who raised me were political at all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Actually, my stepfather, who I love very much, and when I talk about my dad, that's really who I'm talking about. Um, he was I mean, he grew up in the South. He was born like in the late 30s. And so he grew up in the South in a very dangerous time, right? He grew up in Jim Crow. And no, he was very like pull your pants up, do your work, all that kind of stuff. And he had been in the military. He went to Vietnam. Uh but I mean, he was very proud to be black, and I think that there's a certain kind of pride that's passed on, even if it's just through that, right? But no, he was not he was not a radical. Oh, my father, my Mexican father is a Trumper. And he's really, yeah, I was very disappointed. When I finally met him, I was very disappointed in several of the interactions that we had. I think I was working for the farm workers one time, and he just went off. He's like, oh, those guys are.
But I guess if you're saying that neither your mom nor any of your parents were political, how is it that you got to the left and the RUP?
Yeah, so I think that I mean it's a long
A long
it's a long
Okay.
story. I mean it's 59 years, right, of story. But I mean the one thing that I will say is this, and I think that this is probably what had the most profound impact on me. Um, I'm on my mom's side, they were readers, right? They weren't necessarily educated like formally, but they were readers, and they were, petit bourgeois, right? We had a house full of books growing up, and the one thing that the one thing that we had total unfettered access to were the books. There were no books in my parents' house that were off limits. And I mean, I would just say I read some wildly inappropriate things when I was a little kid, right?
Okay.
But I mean, I just
Politically inappropriate?
no,
Oh.
sexually inappropriate. Yeah, but there was a book, and I just recently found this book, and these were books that my mom had, right? So she had like Dick Gregory's first autobiography, right? The first book he wrote, which is titled Nigger, right? And it talks about his life growing up. Um, she had a book, and I think that I read it as a very young boy. It was called Can't You Hear Me Talking to You? And it was a compilation of essays of students from the Bronx in New York City, probably in the late 50s and early 60s. It was put together by their teacher. Her name was Carolyn Merce. That book had a profound impact on me as a young boy, right? Yeah, it was incredible. And then the Dick Gregory book, and then, I mean, we just had access to all these things. So it wasn't that my parents were pushing me in this direction, right? But it's very clear that even though when I talk with my mom, or even growing up, like, it wasn't about, being political, that she was very much reading the books of that time. You know what I'm saying? And the fact that, as a young white woman from a upper middle class family, that she chose to first marry a farm worker and then, a black man from Nashville, Tennessee. She was a child of her times, right? Um, yeah.
I guess what you're saying is that all of these experiences, the things that you read, the fact that, you had an absent father, maybe,
Yeah.
and also you had a new father that
Yep.
came with its own history.
Yeah.
All of these things might have pushed you to the left, or how is it? I am still struggling to understand that moment where you find the Raza Party, or was it something that you found through literature later on, or like, yeah, how is it that you get?
Well, when I was in seventh grade,
Mhm.
which was in the 70s sometime, I was in seventh grade. I was at a school called Walter French Junior High School. This is probably the pivotal moment, to be honest with you. I was struggling in school, like a lot of young Chicanos do, Chicanas also. And we had there was a man who was a school counselor. He was a young guy. His name was Samuel Gonzalez. And I used to spend a lot of time in Mr. Gonzalez's office because I was in trouble a lot. Yeah. And one day he said, "Hey, have you seen the thing for the talent show that's coming up?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Are you going to be in it?" And I said, "No, I don't really, have a talent like that." And so he gives me this book, right? And it has on the front of it is a picture of these two cholo dudes, right? And it says Yo soy Joaquin, right? And he said, "Have you ever heard of this book?" And I said, "No, I've never heard of it." And he said, "This is what I think we should do." Because he played the guitar, right? He said, "Let's go through the book together and let's pick out passages, and then you will read them while I play the guitar, and we'll do that at the talent show, right?" Um, that was a big moment for me, right? Because that was, I think, probably, I mean, growing up with a white mom and a black dad, right? I mean, I knew it was Mexican, but I didn't know what any of that meant. I didn't know what it meant to be Mexican, you know. But when I got that book, right, like that changed so much for me. That poem did. And it's interesting. I know I talked to people who are my age or a little bit older, how many of them that poem was like that moment, for them, that the world just blossomed. So it's probably right around seventh grade that I'm really introduced to Chicanismo, right? To the Chicanada. Um and it begins to build from there, but it goes like this, over time. And then when I finally got into college, uh that's when it really started to take off again.
That's when you found
Well,
history,
I,
or
I mean, that's when I started reading and learning about, really reading and learning about Chicano history.
but what about the party?
Oh, the party. Oh, I'm sorry. I mean,
Okay.
that actually doesn't really come till much later,
Mm,
to be honest. That comes about 5 years ago.
mm.
Um, what I had realized after years of organizing and working in different, for unions and, student movements and all this other kind of stuff, was that, and after building that program at Prescott College, was that we were too focused on the local, right? Like everything was about what's happening right here, you know? And if you're not from here, you can't say anything. And if you're not from here, then we don't want to hear what you have to say. And it's just all right here. Which didn't really seem to be working either. So I met Ernesto Ayala somehow. I can't exactly remember how. But
Who is
Ernesto Ayala is currently the chair of the party.
Mhm.
And then we started talking and, you know, he invited me to this meeting. What I had decided for myself was that I wasn't going to put a lot of energy into local organizing anymore. That I had done that for, you know, 35 years. And that's not what I was gonna do with my remaining days. You know what I'm saying? So
Okay.
I was like, there has to be we have to have a national organization. I mean, particularly after I got through writing in Surgeon Aslan and was doing
Mhm.
my doctoral work. I mean, I realized that I realized that national organization is the key, you know. But that it has to be very carefully structured. Because it can't just be a national organization with no local chapters,
Mhm.
and it can't just be local chapters with no national organization, right? So it was gonna be a lot of work. But that's how I came to the party, because I mean, honestly, I saw that as I saw the Raza Unida Party as the fastest way to that end goal.
Mhm.
It had name recognition. There were people who were working on it already. They just needed an organizer.
And I guess that end goal is my next question. Like, why now? What does it mean to bring back the RUP, the Raza Unida Party? What does it mean to reach back to this history? And specifically, what does it mean for the possibilities of the left today? Is there something happening now that makes you reach back? Why now? Yeah, why now bring the Raza Unida Party?
Well, I mean, it doesn't just have to do with Donald Trump, you know. I mean, Donald Trump has been a very good recruiter for the Raza Unida Party, you know. And he has. There's no other way to put it. I mean, since he became president, we've experienced 914% growth, you know. So I mean, you know, bring it on, right? I think you know, you can't say decolonize, decolonize, decolonize. This is our land, this is our land, this is our land. You know, you just can't keep saying that forever, you know. Because there's some things that are gonna happen. If you keep saying that long enough, eventually somebody's gonna believe it, right? And then when they believe it, they're gonna say, well, if this is our land, then how come we don't control it, right? Um, or you're gonna keep saying, this is our land, this is our land, and then somebody's gonna say, why do these guys keep saying this is their land, right? So either way, what we have experienced over the last, I think about 40 years, maybe 50 years, is this ongoing conversation about decolonization and who the land belongs to, right? Like land acknowledgements, you know. I mean, all of those types of things. And I think that what we're seeing, not just from Donald Trump, but like from white settler colonial society in general, is this tremendous backlash against, you know, this this idea that has absolutely taken root in our community, right? And that idea is of decolonization, and it is of, you know, sovereignty and you know, the return of land. So you know, I think that what's happening right now with the Raza Unida Party is an outgrowth of that, right? And I say that because I don't think that 30 years ago we could have done this. I don't think people were
Oh,
ready.
why not?
Well, because they didn't believe it yet, right? Like,
The decolonized.
yeah, I mean, they hadn't heard it enough yet, you know? I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that I really do believe that. I think that's what it is. They just hadn't heard it enough yet. So, I think that everything, all of these different movements, or, however you want, they all reach a tipping point.
So today you feel that conditions are different, that people have heard this enough?
I think that we're seeing the material reality of what it is that they've heard, right? We see the rise of danza since the 90s.
Of what, sorry?
Danza, like danza azteca,
Okay.
which in and of itself isn't a revolutionary thing, right? But it is it is a return, right? It is a way of thinking about how it is that we reconnect, the past to the present. Not how we return to the past, but how do we reconnect the past to the present? I think the MAS struggle that you saw in Tucson and the introduction of native epistemologies, right? Back into educational settings is also an outgrowth, an example of that. I think that the kind of organizing that we're doing through Raza Unida is an example of that. I mean, there's just it's going to move that way, and it is. And it's not going to move that way. It is moving that way. So, I mean, as we begin to think about how these things are put together, right? Even though a lot of these things aren't inherently, or people don't think of them as political. I mean, they are founded, in the cultural reality of the community, right? So one of the things, I mean, if you think about, there's a quote from Cabral that I really like when he's talking. He's giving this speech at the Tricontinental Congress in 1966, and the speech is called "The Weapon of Theory." That's the title of it. And what Cabral is talking about is how conquered, colonized people are divested from the means of production, right? Like that's one of the. I mean, that's the whole thing. Yeah, these people come in, they take over the land, they take over, all the resources and all that. And so, as conquered, colonized people, what is it that we produce, right? And what Cabral is saying is that we produce culture. That is the production of conquered, colonized people. So as long as those people are producing culture, right, what they're working on, and these are his words, is the negation of this imperialist presence, right? So we, as we look at that, and he's saying that that negation ultimately leads to what he calls the return to history, and what he's talking about when he says return to history is return to history as as a group of like a nation, like there's a recognized, distinct grouping of people with political sovereignty.
But I guess to return to the question of the why now,
Yeah.
is there something about the kind of constituency that you're going after, or about the American fabric, or whoever you want to, vote for your party, or what you may have different goals for the party? Like what are the opportunities today for bringing the Raza Party? I think you mentioned that people have heard this enough. And so what does that mean? Like what does that bring for the goals that you may have?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that it's probably very important to say that as a political party, that we do not that we don't embrace the idea or the fantasy of being in control of a settler colonial society, right? Like that's not why we're doing this. We're not going to run people for president or vice president or anything like that. That's a waste of time, I
So
think.
you have, as a party, you have a different.
Well, we do, but that also doesn't mean that we're not going to run people for office, right? Again, like in local levels, local play areas. I think that as a party, we have dedicated ourselves to growing an organization that will eventually, or can, provide a dual power situation, right? Where we're able to work within the community, especially as resources are taken away. I mean, we've got to figure out how to replace those, I mean, collectively, right?
Mhm.
Because if we don't, I mean, people will starve, people will die from sickness, they won't be able to go to the doctor. I mean, it's just what is being laid out in front of us is I mean, it's genocidal, really, I mean, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people will die, from lack of care, or, lack of food or whatever, right?
So I guess rather than necessarily centering elections as your goal,
Mhm.
you are trying to bring this message to a certain constituency.
Well, we are, and again, it's like I was saying last night, we're not taking anything off the table,
Mhm.
right? So if we need to run somebody, then we're gonna run them. If we need to build a community garden, then we're gonna build a community garden, right? If we have to teach people how to grow their own food, then we'll teach people how to grow their own food. Um, because we believe that what we're essentially teaching them is sovereignty, right? Which is something that our community doesn't understand.
Mhm.
We understand the sovereignty of the United States, right? Or the sovereignty of Mexico, right?
Mhm.
These things have been very clearly demonstrated to us how in charge those people are, right? We don't need an explanation of that. What we need to begin to understand is that we actually possess the capacity to do the same thing, right? And yeah,
Let me ask you about history.
okay.
What historical lessons should the current Raza Unida Party draw from whatever the previous Raza Unida Party did? Do you think, I mean, you can call it failure, you can call it an ongoing struggle. I don't know what you want to
Yeah.
regard of history, but I guess what lessons can be drawn from this new left, the RUP from that era?
I mean, I think one of the first lessons that we would have to draw from looking at the past is that it is absolutely essential that these movements are not built around individuals, but they are built and that they're built, around ideology, right? Like and that they function with tiers of leadership, right? Um, because a part of what happens when you build something about or a movement like this around ideology is that there's a lot of hero worship that happens, right? Um, and that's what's really allowed a lot of the abuses of the past. A lot of them, oh, most of them,
Do you think in the party this was something?
yeah, yeah, I do. Well, I mean, 1972, at the Raza Unida Convention, I mean, the women walked out, right? I
Oh,
mean,
why did they want that? Yeah.
well, I mean, they walked out because the guys were being jackasses, right? And I mean, so, bam, I mean, it was a huge moment of the party. So, I think that it's important to, not center these movements around individuals, but to center them around principles.
So no
You know,
leaders, more.
well, I know, I
Okay,
wouldn't say that.
all right.
Yeah, no. I mean, but I think that leaders need to be democratically chosen, right? And I think that they need to be challenged. I mean, we just, that's the way it needs to be. We start, I mean, now that we have city chapters, we'll start mentoring and moving people up, the line, right? To allow for new leadership,
Mhm.
I think that one of the other things that we need to really keep in mind is that regardless of our numbers in this country and the way those numbers are growing or will continue to grow or not continue to grow, that that this is not just about Mexicans, right? This isn't it's just not, and it can't be. I mean, the issues that are facing us are issues of survival of the human race. Um, so we talk a lot about what direction we go with that. Um, and I think that that's important. We have,
Mhm.
we have white members, we have black members already. The majority are, Chicano, Chicana. But I think even that, I think in time will change, So really keeping those two things in mind. And I really think that the last thing that we need to really understand is that whatever we do, we have to do something different than what was done before. And that doesn't mean to totally throw it all out, right? But that to simply replicate the movement of the 60s. I mean, even if you say, okay, well, we're gonna eliminate, the misogyny and all this, right? But we're gonna replicate everything else, it's not gonna work,
Why do you think they wouldn't work?
because I think the world's a very different place than it was 50 years ago. I
Mhm.
mean, I basically what you're talking, I mean, like for myself, I'm born in 1966, right? I was born right at the end of when this was happening.
Yeah.
So the world that I grew up in is a very different world than the world that exists right now in 2025,
Mhm.
right? And I can see from my own life's experience how much it has changed. I mean, it's crazy, So we have to do something different. Um,
For those
and
historical
for
lessons,
those historical lessons, yeah,
uphold them.
that's right. Well, to say, okay, this is what happened, right? How do we, do that? And I think this is where we use the dialectic,
Mhm.
I think that it is important to it's important for us to question each other, right? And that goes back to the basis of the whole hero worship thing. You can't question heroes, right?
Yeah.
You don't question Captain America, you don't question Thor, I mean, they just do what they do, right? Um, and it's the same thing with this. So, I mean, that has to be inculcated, that has to be really just ground into, the fabric, right, of what
Yeah.
we're doing. And I would say finally, the last thing that we have to is we have to not give up, you know. And I know that that's a really simple thing to say. But there's this really good book. It's a good book. It was written by this French lieutenant colonel. His name was David Palula, and he was part of the French military in Algeria. Um, during the Algerian, war. And he wrote the very first book about counterinsurgency, that was specifically about counterinsurgency. What's really interesting is that he was writing that book at the same time that Fanon was writing Wretched of the Earth, right? And they were both there in Algeria. It must have been wild in Algeria, right? So Galula writes this book about counterinsurgency, and one of the lines that really stuck with me, right, is he says that the danger of insurgency, and he's talking to people who are against insurgency, is that the insurgent is under no obligation to reveal themselves until they are ready, right? That's a huge piece of advice. I mean, you don't have to go around telling people you're an insurgent. You don't have to go around telling people you're a revolutionary. I mean, and even after reading that, I mean, that really like profoundly impacted me. And it made me really start questioning people who go around saying things like that. I'm just like, why are you telling everybody that? Right. So, I mean, what do we do? What are we doing here at the Raza Unida Party? I mean, we are attempting to restore um, indigenous sovereignty, right? I mean, I don't think it's any secret that we are against settler colonialism, that we are against capitalism. Um, but, you know, does that mean that, we're stockpiling guns and all that kind of stuff? No, it doesn't mean that at all, right? It means we are against these things. We will continue to talk about them. We will continue to expose them to the extent that we can. And we will continue to have principled conversations with people in our community to help to bring them along, right? Yeah.
Mhm. So I guess we touched a little bit on leadership. I kind of pushed you that direction. We've been building a little bit more on history and what the previous Rasa Party did.
Yeah.
And now we're getting also into maybe what's happened in other countries,
Yeah.
other than where the Rasa Party was. But with regard to these figures, these leaders that were leading the Rasa Party, Like I said to you, I read Armando Navarro's La Raza Unida Party, a Chicano challenge to the U.S. Two-party dictatorship. And in there, I learned that one of your main enemies was the Democratic Party at the time.
Yeah.
And they especially began to discredit you as communist, as socialist, and this could have not been helped but for a trip by Jose Angel Gutierrez, who went in 1975 to Cuba, and he went along with members from the Black Panther Party, from the Puerto Rican Socialists and other groups.
Yeah.
I think later in this book, I also read that there were members that also joined the insurgencies from the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. You were also in the Lebanon, not you, but the previous party.
No, yeah.
We're in the Lebanon,
Yep.
talking to the PLO. And I guess the question that starts to bring here is that starts to emerge here is how the Democratic Party used the Cold War era and some of these accusations of being communist against you to discredit you because of the actions of some of these leaders, some of party members. So I guess the question here that needs to be clarified, and I think we already talked about this, what is your position on socialism, communism, and perhaps of Marxism today, meaning the party's position?
So, I mean, the party's position is we passed a resolution last year at our Congreso, and the resolution is very clear. We do not, the Partido Nacional de la Raza Unida is not a socialist party, it is not a communist party. That our ideology is revolutionary Chicano nationalism. But it's also very clear that we are not against these things at all. But
Do you
that,
still consider you to be in the left, though?
I mean, I'll be real honest with you. It's not that, I mean, I think that in the way that we understand that, like left and right, yes, to the left, right? But the longer that I live and the more that I study and the more I think about this, I mean, I would have to say that I don't really think that the indigenous struggle is a part of the left or the right. The struggle against settler colonialism in the United States absolutely predates both of those ideas, by probably about 100 years or so.
And sorry, I think I interrupted you. So why is it that the RUP today broke ties with its previous Marxist tendency or socialist?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it just exactly that. I mean, as we looked around the country and we looked at the platforms of the DSA and the PSL and, some of these other socialist, and communist organizations, they do not talk about the end of settler colonialism in their platforms. They do not. They talk about forming a socialist government and doing these other things. But I mean, my question is, I mean, okay, so you're a socialist government. All right, does that mean you're going to return the land to, the original inhabitants of it? And my guess is that answer would be no, that they are not going to do that, that we're all going to figure out how to live together on this land, which, if you ask me, isn't any different than the situation that we have right now. What does their platforms have to do with indigenous sovereignty? Are we supposed to just trust that that's what's going to happen, right? And so, we want to be really clear. We don't necessarily, we can be anything that we want to be, you know what I'm saying? And that's what the part that I think that's probably the important.
Do you want to be on the left? Would you want the party to move to the left or to
I want settler colonialism to end, and I want sovereignty to be restored to indigenous people. That's what I want, right? And I think that that's what most of the people in the leadership of the Partido Nacional right now I think that's what they want. Do I have a critique of capitalism? Absolutely, right? Do I think capitalism, am I against capitalism like Jerry Goldberg? Absolutely, right? Do I think it needs to come to an end? Absolutely, and however that happens in the end, right? I think, we need to do that. And we need to do what it takes to make that happen.
So I guess at this point we can say that it's not fully, I guess, I'm not fully sure if RUP would be comfortably on the left or not, but moving beyond that question, if you just ask the party question, so what is the role of the party? And let me elaborate on that, because I feel that also I'm interested in the ways that the party may be obsolete, or the party may be a system that is maybe leading to failure in some circumstances. It certainly did for the RUP, it could be argued.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in understanding the reasons behind RUP as a party and the reasons why it failed, why it stopped, or again, you may have disagreements with this premise, but one thing that you can say is that it did not succeed to the goals that it promised to its constituency back then. And I want to hear you reflect or tell us how you feel about what that means. How does that feel for the constituency that, again, Mexican Americans in Texas and other states, how does that feel today that the RUP didn't fulfill, that it failed to be elected, whatever goals they had before? How does that feel politically, socially, culturally, for those who the RUP used to represent? And so those goals were not fulfilled. Ultimately, here I'm asking, as a party,
Yeah, I get,
what is
yeah.
your goal? What is a party for the RUP? Like, what is the role of the party?
Okay, just,
Mhm.
there's two questions
Right.
there. Do you want me to answer the first one
Go
first?
ahead, go
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Right,
All right. Um, I'm not really so sure that the Raza Unida Party failed in the late 60s or the 70s. I don't know if I would characterize it as a failure. And if it is a failure, it's a failure of personalities, right? That's what I would say. I mean, actually, the Raza Unida Party exploded across this country, elected people as far away as Michigan. And so I think that when you think about the amount of money uh and the deeply ingrained colonialist racist mindset, right? I would actually argue that the Raza Unida Party was a resounding success, even if it was only a resounding success for 2 years. Um, I haven't seen any other independent party make the gains that they made. Not the Greens, not the Libertarians, not any of them,
So
right?
in what ways did it succeed if you don't think it was a failure?
Well, I mean, it succeeded because they began building chapters around the country. It succeeded because they did elect people to different offices in different places. It succeeded because we're still talking about it, right?
Mhm.
So there is a legacy of I mean, there's a legacy,
But is that what the constituency wanted? Just for the party to grow and for people to get elected?
Well, I think that people have a fundamental misunderstanding of what a political party is for.
Okay.
I
So
mean,
what is it for? Yeah.
well, it's to grow, right? I mean, Ben Hameen wrote in his essay Critique of Violence that the purpose of the law is to sustain the law, right? And in doing so, it sustains the state. Um, the purpose of the party is to build the party. I mean, there's no other way to put that. We can't, all of the things that we talk about, right? Immigration, school to pipeline, you name it. If there's no party, you can't do any of those things. I mean, you can't, because it's clear that the Republicans really aren't going to do it. And the Democrats are outing themselves, because they're always like, oh, we'll do it if you put us in power. And then we put them in power and then they don't do a fucking thing, or they're even worse. I mean, Trump's an ass, but Obama still deported more people than Trump did. I mean, still to this day, Obama and Biden deported more people than Donald Trump. I mean, so they just didn't do it the way he's doing it. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, I think that part of what we have to come to accept, right, is that the purpose of the party is to build the party. And in building the party, what you are building is what Lenin called dual power, right? You're building an alternative structure that other people can turn to. That's why they want to get rid of Hamas. I mean, that's where Hezbollah comes from, right? All of these, I mean, that's the Zapatistas, I mean, they are building dual governmental structures that will eventually or have already challenged imperialist and capitalist systems in their country, right? That's why I'm saying here in the United States, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I don't really see what the benefit is of going around saying that we're a socialist organization. As a matter of fact, to tell
But
you,
you go on saying that you're a party though. And
well,
so
we
what
are a
does that
party.
mean?
Yeah. Well, just what I'm saying right now is that we are building these, right? That
For the
we're,
purpose of,
well, for the purpose of ending settler colonialism.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. Not, and I would be real clear, not necessarily for the purpose of establishing a socialist state.
Yeah.
I mean, I think are those two things, does that mean that one thing can't lead to the other? No, it doesn't mean that. What I'm saying is, that's not what we're saying right now.
And I
Yeah.
guess that leads seamlessly to my next
Okay,
question of
yeah.
so
This is
if-
great.
Yeah.
I appreciate
If-
this. This is a
if
good
the-
conversation.
If
Yeah.
the role of your party is to end settler colonialism, I
Mhm.
think you clarified this yesterday. Like,
Yeah.
what does that mean? And I want to get to liberation.
Okay.
Because to me, I am not very clear what is the RUP's idea of liberation. Does that, I think it started to become clear now
Yeah.
that it may or may not relate, probably not, to the universal task of freedom that socialists would bring from, the Enlightenment and we were
Yeah.
cheering for.
Yeah.
So do you reject the idea of liberation that say would mean a struggle for social emancipation, for freedom? Do you have an alternative view of freedom? What is liberation? Like I think again, I'm getting ahead of myself because what
No.
does colonialism,
Yeah.
settler colonialism mean?
Yeah.
Is that related to liberation? Maybe,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think I'll start to answer by saying this.
Mhm.
I think it's as much of a mistake to say that freedom can only come through socialism as it is to say that freedom can only come through capitalist democracy, right? I think that freedom, freedom can come in a lot of different ways, as can liberation and emancipation and all of those things. And in answering it that way, I want to say that in no way, shape, or form do I equate the freedom or the liberation or the emancipation of socialist thought to that of capitalist thought. They're two different end goals. You know what I'm saying? But still using the same words, right? I mean, we're still using the same words, some basic sort of concepts. I think that the idea of indigenous liberation, of pan-indigenous liberation, can bring that type of emancipation. And I don't think it just has to bring it for indigenous people. I think that there are,
Can it be universal?
yes, I believe that it can be, yeah. And I also don't think that that's a question of whether or not we think it can be universal. I think it's a question of whether or not they think it can be
And
universal.
who's they?
Whoever is not we.
Who's the Raza Party?
Well, that's what you're asking me, right?
Mhm.
So whoever is not we is they, the other,
Mhm.
right? And I don't think it's a matter of whether or not we believe that what we have can only be offered to other rasa, right?
Mhm.
I think it's a matter of whether or not the people who are outside of that will allow themselves to believe that, right? Can a bunch of indigenous native descended people from the Americas create a system of liberation, right? That can be applied to all of humanity. Do we have that capacity, right? Are we able to do that?
So I guess I'm just not clear. Is it different than socialism? Why would it? It seems that you think it is.
I don't know if it's different or not. I mean, I think that we're at a point. Well, no, wait a minute. Wait a minute.
You think about it.
Yeah. It is different. And I'll tell you why. Lots of times I hear people say, oh, Native people are automatically socialist because we lived in socialist societies, a long time ago. That's not true. We did not live in socialist societies.
Primitive
Well,
communism.
I mean, we lived in Native American societies, right? Now, the fact that socialism comes along a couple of hundred years later and it sort of mirrors those societies does not mean that we lived in those societies. What it might mean, though, is that socialists are living in Native American, philosophies or epistemologies. I think that's why I'm saying that, right? I think that there is a difference. And part of the reason that I say that is because within our own within our own community, we have to come to a point where we understand that we are smart, that we're smart people, right? That we have all of the things that all of the other people, universities, and not universities 500 years ago, but even now, right? That we have a scientific method, that there are epistemologies, there is a way of being Chicano or Chicana or Chicanx, right? That you can identify, right? You can say these are things that work within this society. The question, I think, then becomes, do those things rise to the level of, like you were saying, like emancipation, right? I don't know the answer to that question. I believe they do, right? But I mean, just because I believe that, it doesn't necessarily mean that other people are going to believe it, right? So, which I think is part of the conversation that you heard last night, where the Juan Tejeda was talking about the name of the party, right? Like the Raza Unida Party, and how much it in people's mind that just identifies with, Chicanos or Mexicans, right? I get that. I don't dispute that at all. I think I don't think that's what Raza means. Like, I know Raza doesn't equal Mexican, that's just not the word. But I understand that people think that, right? So, how do we change? I mean, if we are materialists, and we are materialists, right? Then what we understand is that conditions are constantly in flux and that they're constantly changing, which also means that through the dialectic that we have to question everything that we do, right? And keep questioning until we arrive at some semblance of what we can consider true for the moment, right? But as contradictions resolve themselves, like Mao says, they resolve themselves into their opposite, right? So if one of the main contradictions of indigenous people right now is that we're conquered, colonized people, the way as that contradiction resolves itself, and then we become sovereign people, a new contradiction arises. Now, what that contradiction is, I don't know, but I would bet that it has something to do with the way that we treat other people, So I don't think it's necessarily about us being socialist or not socialist. We are indigenist with a T on the end. And that is the way that we see each other, and that's the way we see ourselves. And like I said, we're not taking anything off the table. I can tell you right now that we will form corporations, right? We will form LLCs, and we will use those LLCs to create businesses that work to fund the party and to fund party members. We will absolutely do that.
Is this the RUP when you're saying we that you're gonna
Yeah,
do
the
that?
partido. Yeah, nacional. We will do that, right?
Yeah, those were things that the Texas party used to do.
Yeah.
Like they were entrepreneurial.
Yeah, and so is our community. Our community is entrepreneurial. You know what I'm saying? I mean, Look
And
at
that
the,
does that with the indigenous people.
yeah, that's, yeah. And I mean, you look at like one of the big fights in LA was around street vendors. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we, yeah. So, I think that even when you look at Marx, I mean, in particular, I mean, he's not, I don't, and if I'm wrong about this, you all let me know. But I mean, it's not about buying and selling things, right? It's about the alienation that is created through, you know, through through commodification, right? Um, in the alienation of the worker as they're separated, again, from the means of production, right? And their labor is reduced to a wage, Um, so I think that there's a lot of ways to really think about this. But yeah, we'll form nonprofits, we'll form LLCs, um, we'll form political PACs. I mean, we're gonna do it all, because what we realize is that all of these things, at least for now, are available to us through the world that we live in, right? And I mean, I take Galula's advice very seriously. I mean, we could do whatever we want. And it really, for the most part, it seems to me like a lot of people try to fight with one hand behind their back, Um, so how do we work this, right? How do we make this happen? Um, but I'll also say too, I mean, to be honest, I mean, we're only 5 years into this. I mean, I think that in another 5 years, I might be saying something very, very different, right? But for where we're at right now, this is kind of the way that we've thought about it. So
I'll make this my last question and then I'll open it to the public, but I'm gonna combine several things because I feel that some of the things that I wanted to ask have already been touched upon and I do want to hear from the public. But a lot of your book, The Insurgent Aslan, centers on the notion of cultural resistance.
mhm.
Um, Another term that I want to bring into the conversation is imperialism.
Yeah.
I'm of the mind, and I think you saw that I did another panel on this word, the
Mhm.
resistance specifically.
Yeah.
You say that you care about the dialectic or you use it, and Moshe Buston would have said in regard to the revolution, reform, and resistance, that while revolution and resistance were dialectical and they were in relation to each other, pointing to something,
Yeah.
maybe freedom.
Yeah.
When it comes to resistance, it's merely the act of conserving something or perpetuating the status quo.
Yeah.
And I wonder, I mean, what would you tell to the people on the left that want to move on beyond not just imperialism, resistance, in the individuality of race,
Yeah.
the indigeneity,
Yeah.
and they want to try something new because resistance to me doesn't seem to be anything new. I mean,
Yeah.
it's been tried since the new left.
Since
And
the very beginning.
yeah, and so it acquires this tendency of being more conservative than revolutionary or like innovative. So for me, is that why don't you feel that the preservation of resistance or these terms like imperialism that have now in its usage have become a everything.
Yeah.
Everything that we don't like is imperialism.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
rather than how Lenin identified
Yeah.
it as something, that was a process
Yeah.
in a moment in history
Yeah.
where the proletarian could have taken that
Yeah.
and use it to its advantage.
Yeah.
Today, it's not even, we don't even see the possibilities
Yeah.
of that. May there may not be there.
Yeah.
So I guess these words, resistance, imperialism, like how much do they come to just be conservative, to preserve,
Yeah.
to keep in the status quo?
Yeah.
Resisting for what? Imperialism is everything, is the boogeyman.
Yeah.
So I want,
Yeah.
what
I'm
do you,
with you. Yeah.
so tell us about that. Again, your book centers on this.
It does. And it centers on it. Primarily I'm drawing from the ideas of Cabral, when I'm talking about resistance. And it's resistance to, this cultural the imposition, right, of colonialism and the removal of the colonized from the means of production or resources, whatever. No, I agree with you. I do. I think that there are a lot of things like that. Like, I think that resistance is very conservative, especially the way that it's conceptualized and most people carry it out. Because, I mean, what it, I think mostly does right now, in the way that people talk about it, is a continual reification of like European superiority, right? Because we're always in opposition to those people, right? To Europeans, to white settler colonialism. And I know I talk about that a lot too, but I talk about it because I feel that it's the context of which we have to have this conversation. Um, I think that one of the big things that we've done with the party, and I wonder kind of what Diana thinks about this too, this one in particular, is that we're not trying to be just against this. We're trying to be for this, right? Um, and so when we talk about the things, you know, that we're for, right? We're for building a structure that will allow us to establish policy and that will allow us to work in communities, right? I mean, we are for the common good, right?
And do you stop and criticize the ways that maybe the left today is not sufficiently critical for these anti things that they are?
I mean, I think that there are a lot of groups that have that they
Uncritically.
yes, they just, I mean, I don't know what they're doing, to be honest with you. And I'll tell you, I'll be real honest with you. I mean, we've been honest this whole thing. I feel like the way that things are happening in the immigration movement is exactly that. I mean,
Oh, tell us about
well, I mean, I feel like it's a very conservative response, right?
in
Like,
what sense?
well, in the sense that it all focuses on trying to stop something that they're not going to stop, right? It's very performative. But I mean, if you think about it, I mean, just think about it. If there are really 62 million, if there are 62 million Latinos in the United States, 42 million of them are Mexican, and we can't stop ICE rates with 42 million people, come on. I mean, there's something bigger, at play here. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that it's important for us when we think about things like resistance, that maybe what we're also doing is reaching a moment in time where we should be thinking less about resistance.
You have to
and more
have
about building.
I mean, you have to have a structure
that will
that can deal with millions of people
take us
at a
to,
time,
these,
and I don't want to,
issues of
sound all
sovereignty,
grandiose
right?
or whatever,
Recording in
which is
progress.
again,
because
one of the
we're not at
reasons
that
why
stage,
a
right?
party is absolutely
that-
necessary. You can't do that with 5 people. You just can't. I mean, as wonderful as those 5 people are, right? There's 62 million of us right now. Because we're not at that stage, right? But that's the way that we're thinking about it. No, I think a lot of resistance that's happening right now is very conservative. And I think that it absolutely plays into the settler colonized binary. That is a constant reification of white supremacy, and a recentering actually of white supremacy. I mean, people talk about white people centering themselves. I think we center white people way more in our work, right? Because
Meaning you, the party, or the
no, just
indigenous people?
we the left. Yeah, that we the left. I think that we do that, right? Because because we're against it, right? We feel so desperately about it, and we know that this has to end. but we have not done a good job defining what we're for. You know, how are we going to do this? Like people talk about the Zapatistas, but I mean, let's really look at the Zapatistas, right? I mean, they're building a government, you know, or I mean, they're not building one, they have built one, right? Um, and they operate that government alongside of or in the sphere of the Mexican government, you know. And they don't, you know, they elect their people, they go do these things and all this other kind of stuff. I mean, this is where we need to be. One of the very first programs that the party proposed was a national plebiscite. And we haven't taken it off the table, right? And actually, to tell you the truth, I think after a couple more years of Trump, the plebiscite idea might actually get some traction because none of us may ever vote again, you know, at least not in one of their elections. But you know, the thing is that voting is important, right? How else do you how else are you going to get the opinions of millions of people? Is it a perfect system? Absolutely not. But you know, I mean, there's got to be a way to record people's opinions, right? Because if we're not doing that, then you know what's going to happen. I mean, a group of few small people are going to make decisions for everybody, you know, and they'll do it with impunity because everybody's all like, well, I don't do that because it doesn't change anything, you know. But if we find or we figure out or develop ways to hold votes within our own community, I mean, even go back to the immigration, right? I mean, if there's 62 million of us and we hold a plebiscite, does everybody here know what a plebiscite is? Okay, plebiscite is a vote. It's a vote of the people or that people put together. They do these in other countries all the time. But it's not binding on the state, right? But it's usually referendums on what do they call it? When two countries separate. It's usually referendums on that type of thing, right? National liberation, national independence, that kind of thing. But if there's 62 million of us and we hold a plebiscite, right? And let's say, you know, that we get 50% of the vote or 50% of those 62 million people vote in this plebiscite on the issue of whether or not, let's make it real simple, immigration is important, right? And that plebiscite, that you know, 75% of the people say this isn't the most important issue, right? That, you know, this is the most important issue. But you know, we can't even really realistically say that we know for a fact that this is an important issue to the entire community because we don't know, right? I mean, I think it's an important issue. You think it is. Probably everybody else in here thinks it is. But there's a lot of us, you know. I mean, like that guy was talking about last night in San Antonio about all the people in the valley, right, who are voting for Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, how are those guys going to vote, right? And then some people may say, well, we shouldn't let them vote, right? They might say that, right? Which would be a stupid thing to say, I think, you know, and very naive at least.
Not
letting people vote, right? I mean, then okay,
because they vote for Trump.
That's right. So now we're acting just like those guys are, you know. I mean, the thing is that we're not in a position to fear each other or to fear each other's opinions. That we're in a position where we are forced to listen, right? And to think about how it is that we scale up movements, not scale them down. I mean, you know, we have already a lot of different people in the partido. You know, we have some people who are hardcore Catholics, man. You know, I mean, they are. And then we have some people who are like hardcore atheists, you know.
If your goal is growing, you're doing it.
Yeah, and the goal is to grow, right? Like I said, we're not trying to be the vanguard, right? We're trying to build a political party. And I think that because I look at vanguardism in the United States in the last 50 years, and I'm just like, I don't think that worked, you guys, you know, or it doesn't seem like it's working very well, you know. So yeah, that's But I agree with you. I do, especially very much so about that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Resistance and imperialism.
Yeah, what resistance and imperialism and the way that we,
Uncritically.
yes, yeah, absolutely. Uncritically think about those things.
All right. Well, now I'm gonna shift to my role as moderator, and I want to invite people to ask questions to Dr. Mireles. Just raise your hand if you have a question, unless, we're gonna try to, we are underrepresented, the platypus members. I think we just have two right now. So mostly, people from the, wild left. Anybody has a question here? Okay, let's start with you, sir, right here.
Thanks for speaking. I learned a lot and really thought-provoking conversation.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
So it sounded like discussion was really kind of pushing towards, do you see yourself as a left movement, as a socialist movement, or as
Yeah.
a capitalist, but not necessarily socialist? So, and one message that you kept kind of putting out there was what we're going for is the reversal of settler colonialism.
Yeah.
Right? So when the rubber hits the road, or when the dog catches that car, what is that? It sounds like you're saying LLCs and whatnot. You're still willing to work within a capitalistic framework, but you're not necessarily tied to it. You said, right? So maybe at some point it moves more towards a socialist bend. So can you explain like what that looks like, what the reversal of settler colonialism means? Does that mean like more private property for Chicanos, or does that mean its own,
No, I get your question. That's a good question. No, it doesn't mean more private property for Chicanos. What it means is what Cabral said, the destruction of the imperialist framework, right? That has negated who we are as a national entity. The problem with that answer, the answer that I just gave you, is that there's no way to know exactly what that looks like, right? I think that if I would say that the ultimate goal is to end settler colonialism. There's no question about that. How settler colonialism ends, I don't know. Does it die, with a weak gasp? Does it go down in a hail of bullets? I couldn't tell you. I think that, but no, it's not. I understand what your question, where you're getting at, but no, it's not about economic, we're going to economically empower everybody and we're going to make more money than everybody. And, that's not it.
I think if I may,
that's a good question. Yeah.
Embedded in that question, correct me if I'm wrong, it's also this idea of either regressing or going to something before capitalism, or as socialists would believe, to overcome it, to go beyond it, to use use it as a fertilizer to whatever we like in the future. While some people, especially, have an suspicion that some people with indigenous politics may come to oppose it as something that needs to be regressed from, like to come back. I guess what would you in some aspects are wanting to use capitalism rather than coming back to a previous system?
Well, I don't think we have a choice. I don't think that there's a choice. If we're realistic about opposing, or not even opposing, if we're realistic about building a system that will create political power within the United States, we don't have a choice but to use capitalism. And this is the thing.
To overcome.
Well, yeah, every one of us has a job in here, and I'm not trying to be funny, but that's using capitalism, right? I went to, I have all three of my degrees, on student loans and these other things. That's using capitalism. We are trapped within this system, right? You can't operate outside of the circle, only God operates outside of the circle, right? And we know, that's materialist. We understand that that's not reality, right? So I think, and so I think that it's important to state that it's not an embracing of it, right? That it is a utilitarian approach to what it is that we want to accomplish. And what we want to accomplish is the liberation and the emancipation of not just indigenous people, but all people, right? In here, in the area that we live in. So yeah, no, that's you're right. That's good. No, it's not an embracing of it. It's a recognition that we at this particular moment in time cannot escape it, right? That we need money to print flyers, right? We need money to rent spaces to have meetings,
So in a way, the indigenous subject needs to become bourgeois.
I think that you could say it like that. I don't know if I would, but I understand.
What is your disagreement?
Well, no, I don't know if it's a disagreement. I just don't know if I would use that word, right? I think bourgeois has a certain, connotation to it that I'm not sure is, is 100%. We need to, we need to recognize and figure out how to exploit what is not been available to us to work for, or to work towards liberation, right? Yeah.
Anyone else?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, this is fun. I haven't ever been able to do something like this in a long time. Yeah.
So first of all, I want to forgive us for coming in late, but
Can you speak up a little bit? Because
so forgive me if this question has already been asked before, but I guess something that I was kind of interested in, coming in here in the end, I was hearing about conversations regarding the Raza Party, or I guess about the difference between like community organizing versus party building, right? And I guess something that I was kind of curious about in regards to the Raza Unida Party is, does the Raza Unida Party function more as an interest group, or does it function more as an interest group trying to push, say, for example, like the Democratic Party, or a party that already exists more towards the interest of what Raza hopes for, or does it try to organize independently?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. No, we have no connection to the Democratic Party. We're not trying to push them. We're not trying to, we're not really trying to do anything with them. Now, that being said, let me say this, that because I think that this is an important aspect of the answer for transparency. In the last election, there was a very big debate inside of the Partido about Kamala Harris, and not about Donald Trump, but about Kamala Harris, right? Because there were a lot of party members that were really going in hard on Kamala Harris. And then there were a lot of party members that were like, I don't think that's a very smart idea, right?
how were they going hard on?
Oh, they were like posting like, Kamala, you know what I'm saying? Just all this, they were really going in on her, like through the memes and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that like the stuff they did, swung the election or anything like that. But
It was a conversation.
But it was a conversation, and it was an ongoing conversation. It was like, oh my God, not again. What we decided in the end was this, that we actually opened up, because before this last election, you could not be in any other party and be a member of the Raza Unida Party. We actually changed that.
Oh.
Yeah. You can be in any party and a member of the Raza Unida Party until such a time as Raza, or the Partido Nacional, gains ballot recognition in the state that you live in, right? Because what we realized is that there are people, who have since joined the party, who are like hardcore, union activists and other people like that, whose job really depends on them being a part of the Democratic Party. okay, that's fine. You want to be a part of the Democratic Party? That's cool. Pay your $10 a month, join Raza Unida, and and help us build, right? Because it doesn't say, they're not saying you can't be a part of the Raza Unida. What we were saying is you can't be a part of Raza Unida if you're a part of them, which I think was incredibly short-sighted on our part, right? So no, we're not trying to be a lobby group or an interest group within the Dems. I mean, the Dems are ridiculous right now. I mean, it's embarrassing. I mean, I feel embarrassed for them as I watch them flail around. And it's, even my mom, who I talked about earlier, lifelong hardcore Democrat, I mean, she called me the other day and she was just like, I'm not voting for these guys again. And I was like, yeah, of course you're not, I mean, because you're an intelligent woman, I mean, it's just
What did it for
crazy.
her?
I think that what did it for her was the way that they've reacted to Trump's ICE raids. She's pretty down on the ICE raids. And she's just like they're literally like
She was expecting more from them.
she was expecting something from them, right? Which I think that they have not delivered. They haven't even delivered something yet, it's not even about folding or anything. I mean, I think, Republicans propose it and Democrats vote for it, man. I mean, all throughout the history, right? I mean, even if you look at amnesties, the last two amnesties that were granted under a Republican president, not under a Democratic president, so it's just like, yeah, I mean, later for these guys, right? So it's a good question. It's a good clarifying question. We're building a political party, we're building, I guess if you want to call it a third party, you can call it that. I'm not sure that we necessarily see it that way as a third party. We believe, I think, for the most part, that what we're building is a structure, that a political structure that people can plug into. We may run people for office in different places, but that's not the main goal, right? The main goal is to continue to build, to continue to educate, to build what I would call alternative structures. So, for instance, one of the things that we've done is the way that we've set up our city chapters is that city chapters split when they reach 150 people. So every time a city chapter reaches 150 people, it splits and the territory is divided. So in Houston, we have one chapter right now that has 59 people. When they recruit another 100 people, we're going to split that chapter in half and we're going to draw a line through Houston. And this chapter will be in charge of this side. This chapter will be in charge of this side. When those chapters reach 150 people, we're going to split those and then we're going to draw some more lines, right? What we're thinking about is how do we create how do we go from the largest territory, right, which is North America, to the smallest territory, which is the three block area that's over here. And how do we understand who's in charge of who's responsible? In charge is not the right word. Who's responsible for those areas all the way down to that three block level? This is part of the conversation that we had in the beginning, is we were like, okay, there's 5 of us, but how's this going to work when there's 10,000 of us, right? How's this going to work when there's 20,000 of us? And I think that one of the things that's fundamentally different in that approach than from other, like the last 50 years of Chicano movement organizing, is that I don't think that people have started with the expectation that one day there was going to be 10,000 of them, right? They were like, how would we ever reach 10,000? But we know how to reach 10,000, right? You just can't, you just can't get on people about every little thing that happens, right? You're like, okay, go to church, man. We'll see you when you get back, right? Yeah. Tell God I said, what's up? I'm not going, but you know what I mean, right? Yeah. And so it's just like, okay. Because there's nothing wrong with it. It's who they are, so yeah, but yeah, no, we don't got anything to do with the Dems.
Any other questions?
I have a couple. First, I want to say thank you so much for putting this on. I've learned a lot from this panel. I have two questions. You spoke earlier about hero worship within, I think it was within the old iteration of Raza,
Mhm.
maybe as a tendency within left movements now and during the era of the new left. Could you talk more about like what that kind of looked like in your experience at least?
I mean, I think it looks like people getting away with whatever they want to, whatever it is that they want to do, right? I mean, I think, I mean, you look at, well, I mean, Trump is, I mean, an easy example. I mean, this guy, it is clear that this guy has spent a lifetime abusing other people. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, in horrendous just ways that other people would have been imprisoned and, you know, just, and probably lived lives of complete misery, you know, because of their actions. That's hero worship, right? To be able to, that people do and say whatever they want and other people make excuses for them. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I think that in a lot of ways, I think that the left, and I do mean the left in this particular instance, has done a really, from the time that I was a young man until now, has done a really good job challenging sexism, you know, and I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying that we've done a good job challenging it, right? From all sides of it. And that as a result of that, you know, there's a lot of hero worship that's kind of gone down, you know, as it should be, right? I mean, as it should be. People should not feel comfortable to say whatever pops into their minds all the time. I think that you know, as we look around and we think about hero worship, you know, all of us are subjected. So a friend of mine just texted me earlier. She's a professor at Grand Valley State University. And she was saying that she had been invited to participate in a reading of the Declaration of Independence, right? So my dear friend Nora is a hardcore Chicana, right? And she was like, and she wrote to me and she's like, I feel like I have three options here, you know, tell them I'm busy, go up there and say, I'm not going to read the phrase merciless savages, you know what I'm saying? Or I forget what the third one was. Or, and she was saying that mostly everybody had told her, you know, don't pick a fight, right? But as we look at those documents, like the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, I mean, people all the time, you know, they're like, well, you're violating my rights. Well, you know, those documents were written by slave owners and rapists, you know. I mean, but we don't have, but it's, you know, it's hero worship, right? I mean, we go around talking about our rights all the time, rights that were given to us by, you know, rich, you know, white men, you know, so there's like a foundation to it, right? It's part of who we are, I think, as a nation. That might have went a little afield, but yeah.
I enjoyed listening.
Well, I wonder, I mean, is there a difference between, I don't know, Bonapartism or a whole sort of cult around the hero worshiping figures or cults or parties? Is there a difference between a hero that is worshipped and a leader? Like on the question of, because that's when you said that I wanted to ask
Yeah.
about leadership.
Well, I mean, I think leadership is important. I mean, when I was young guy in my late 20s and 30s, in the 90s, say late 80s and the 90s, you know, I was really into anarchism and the anarchist movement. And still in a lot of ways. I think the way that it's enacted is it's tough to get things done, you know. I think leaders are important. But I think that I do actually, I'm 100% believe this. I believe the primary responsibility of anybody who's a leader is to develop other people into leaders. And if they're not doing that, then they got something up their sleeve. You know, that's what I really think. That's what I think about that. It's all about mentoring, right? And about, which is kind of a whack word, but I mean, it's all about mentoring. It's all about developing multiple tiers of leadership. Because it's really, I mean, when we talk about long-term resistance, I mean, that's the only way that bill gets fit is by doing that, you know. Yeah. So yeah, I think there's a difference. Yes.
Any other questions around here?
Yes, I guess I wanted to ask about because I thought you were very upfront about saying, well, maybe the RUP isn't fighting for a socialist state. for
Yeah.
example, And isn't fighting for socialism or not necessarily, that's not its explicit goal.
Yeah.
essentially, Right. But I also wanted to ask about, let's leave socialism aside for a second,
Okay.
but the working class
Okay.
and the condition of the working class under
Right.
capitalism,
Mhm.
right? And I wanted to bring up a historical example.
Okay.
Cesar Chavez,
Yeah.
who was a contemporary with the original
Yeah.
Raza Party. And he was very successful in organizing workers
Yeah.
in the agricultural sector and whatever. But controversially, he opposed illegal immigration because he campaigned against it in the early 70s because his idea was the capitalists bring in illegal immigrants to use as strikebreakers.
Yeah.
Right? So the reality is that under capitalism, workers of different countries, of different nationalities, of different races are pitted against each other.
Absolutely.
And that's how the system exploits them.
Yeah.
And that's why Marx famously says the workers have no country, because their condition is that they're sort of all in the same boat.
Right.
Right. And so leaving socialism for aside and acknowledging this international condition of the working class, can a party that organizes along racial and nationalistic lines successfully empower the working class?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that that's a good question. That's a good question. I think that one of the things, you know, that is important to remember is that, and that even in leaving socialism aside, that your question assumes a couple of things, right? And so I think it's important. I think it's important to remember that it's not that that Chicanos or Chicanas, Chicanx aren't part of the working class. Actually, in the United States, I think we make up almost the majority of that in terms of like labor. You know what I mean? I think what's important to remember is that the fundamental condition of those there's an added criteria to those workers than there is to workers of European descent, right? Which I don't think necessarily separates them or doesn't allow them to give each other solidarity. But there is a racial struggle for Chicanas, for indigenous people in the United States. I mean, this country's founding, its existence is predicated on our disappearance, right? I mean, until we disappear, Europeans will always be settlers. There's no way for them to be native as long as there is one native person left in this country. So, I mean, that's the added element to it, right? I mean, I think, and I would say this back to you, I think the real part of the question, or another question that we could put on that is, I'm trying to work on the way I say things. The other question that we could put on that is, will European workers recognize the element of indigeneity, and can they actually move past that in order to allow that solidarity to exist, right? That's kind of that's how I would answer that question. The other thing I just want to say real quick is, I know Chavez said some stuff, but that wasn't his lifelong viewpoint, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he very publicly in a number of interviews and speeches that he gave, talked quite at length and quite eloquently about the plight of undocumented people. When that was happening, I mean, there were people who were actively strike breaking. And I think that, I think he got mad. I mean, and said some stupid shit, right? But I don't think yeah, I mean, it's just there's too much other public statement to the contrary. I mean, that comes, years later, right? But that's, yeah, I wanted to say that. I mean, and acknowledging, I mean, he did say those things, and they were dumb, but yeah, that the people that he was talking about were actively breaking his strike. And yeah, so.
Okay, I
Yeah.
didn't mean to say that was his lifelong position,
No,
just that he
I
tried to
I
respond
wanted,
to something.
I wanted you to know that. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
so yeah, that's all. Yeah, no, I didn't think that's what you were saying.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right.
I wanted to ask about I'm kind of interested in what y'all's practice looks like. So you talked earlier about micro business and stuff like that. Are
Yeah.
that something that y'all have already set up, or how do you envision that looking like?
Yeah.
Or if it already exists, what does it look like?
I mean, we're creating prototypes right now. We've created a printing press. We have 3 books scheduled to come out next year. Actually, one of them will be mine. It'll be my second book. It's called Flower Battle, A Theory of Chicano Confrontation. And then there's a book called Once Upon a Time in Aslan, which is like an epic poem. And Asmani lives right in San Antonio, and I'm super embarrassed that I can't remember the title of his book. But it's also a book of poetry. It's fantastic, stuff. So there's that. We call it Maze Popping Press. The t-shirts that are over here is part of a model that we're developing, where actually what we're gonna do is set up a t-shirt production in each state. We're hoping, in a lot of ways, it'll cut down on costs, man. It's really expensive to make t-shirts and mail them to somebody. It's more expensive to mail them than it is to actually make them, right? And so that's part of what we've been doing. We're looking at creating a seed exchange that will operate nationally. We have access to about 20 acres of land right now. That 10 acres of it is in Roswell, New Mexico, and 10 acres of it is down in the RGV. And so we're thinking about how to build agricultural learning stations, right? So that we can bring people in and, and working with the seed exchange, teach people how to begin to grow their own food. This is something that we think is going to become absolutely vital within the next 5 years. People are going to have to know how to grow food, or else they will starve. All those, different things like that. We've thought about cleaning businesses. How do we buy a laundromat? I mean, that's like day one, man. I mean, I don't know about you all, but I spent a lot of money on laundromats over the course of my life, right? Just things like that. What we also really want to do, though, at a certain point, is develop our coffers up enough that we can make microloans to members who have different ideas, right, about this. And yeah, so it's and again, like I said, is that our main goal? No, right? Is it an acknowledgement of the reality that we live in? Absolutely. Yeah, so in thinking about those things, would you think about it? All of our shirts, they're all from secondhand stores. I mean, there's so much clothing in this world that is just, it's just being thrown away, man. It's filling the landfills, and yeah, so everything's secondhand, everything's recycled. And that's really what we're looking at, right? Is how do we bring sustainability to our community, right? Like in a way that isn't all like, they think that we're trying to talk crazy to them, but is real. That's rooted in their material condition, right? This is about survival. So yeah. I think that's mostly my answer to that. Yeah, it's a good question.
Just a few more questions. Anyone else? Mohammed?
I guess a general question, well, yeah, I guess a general question. How do you preserve the constituency? And what I mean by this is, when I think of, for example, the Social Democratic Party in Germany back in the, the late 1800s or early 1900s, right? When they created, or when they were building up the Social Democratic Party, when they made an alternative, or when they made alternative, like, that's called seeming groups or churches, or when they made alternative structures, right? How they were able to preserve their constituency, their working class base, was in some sense making the working class into proletariat, right? Or in some sense changing the working class from being this kind of socioeconomic condition into a political identity. When it comes down to the Raza Unida Party, and correct if I'm wrong, I understand that the Raza Unida Party, its constituency that it appeals to is, Chicanos. But I guess a question that I would have is, how does it make sure that Chicano, doesn't stay as kind of a, sociological category and becomes a political identity? Because otherwise, I think otherwise, the problem with much of leftist politics today is that the reason why leftist politics will often tailgate the Democratic Party is that there is no independent sort of identity or political
Right.
identity for the left.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, or I guess if you say a little bit more than not
Yeah.
your time, as you call it, is when it comes down to many of the parties today, I think, when it comes down to many like leftist parties today, when it comes down to parties that try to organize a certain base, it ends up, the reason why they end up tailgating either the Democrat or on the right, the Republican Party, is because they can't, or it's because whatever constituency they appeal to is already a racket for the Democrat or the
Yeah.
Republican Party.
Mhm.
In America, right? I think one of the main reasons why we never saw, say, for example, Eugene Debb's Socialist Party of America ever really reach foot is because, or really ever reach in some sort of, any sort of success, is because there was never any sort of working class identity that was separate from the Democratic or Republican Party. Whereas, even in Britain, you had the Labour Party, which even if they, were within the kind of like the status quo of the politics, so it still had a working class identity, or
Right.
a political identity that was separate from the other two parties, where
Right.
in which you could have a Labour Party. So I guess that, just to, can that question.
Yeah.
How do you preserve, constituency?
Preserve. Okay. All right. No, I that was the only word that I wasn't sure if you said conserve or preserve. Okay. I mean, I think actually your question is really interesting, right? Because it's interesting to me. Because I think that Chicano is pretty much thought of as a political identity, like right from the beginning, right? Like people will say, I mean, this is a very common thing for people to say that the
At least
Chicano.
it used to.
What's that?
At least.
At least they used to, yeah. And I think it's still in play, right? That Chicano is a political identity, right? That when you say you're Chicano, because you could say you're Mexican, you can say you're Mexican American, you can say you're Latino, but if you say you're Chicano, that you're like taking this particular stance, right? Now, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure that Chicano is the word, right? And this is what my next book is about a lot more. I talk about it a little bit in my first one, but I mean, when we think about this equation of space plus time equals will, which really comes out of Mao's essay on protracted warfare, right? Or at least it's what it boils down to, is that Mao is saying in his struggle against the Japanese, what Mao is saying is that we have to just retreat, right? And as long as we can avoid being destroyed, that we're buying time to and through that buying of time to develop the will of the people to resist, right? And so I think it's the same thing here. What we have to do is we have to figure out how it is that we buy time, right? And we do that through space. Now, in the Americas, we don't have space. Space has been taken, right? All the land's gone. But we do have the space of identity, right? Which also takes us back to what Cabral was talking about in terms of the development of culture and how culture is the one thing that's left to the colonized as a production, right? Or as we have the means to produce culture because of who we are and because of who we are. So as we develop space, I think that people, especially in the Latino community, there would probably be some people who would try to argue with me about what I just said. They always want to argue about their name. I'm Latino, I'm Hispanic, I'm this, I'm that, right? That's like the main argument. It's like we've been stuck in first gear for like the last 50 years, right? Because nobody knows how to like shift us into second and stop arguing about who we are, you know? So as we think about that, I think that what's important to remember is that it isn't necessarily about preserving the Chicano identity, right? What it is about is developing or preserving a space that allows us to develop, right? So as the same way that Mao retreated to avoid destruction from the Japanese is the same way that these new spaces. What I would argue is that Latino, whether you like it or not, was a space that was created to fight against assimilation, not to fight for it, right? Because it allowed us one more chance to say we're not white, right? Same thing with Hispanic, same thing with Mexican American, right? Same thing with Chicano. The challenge is to create a space that's big enough to hold everybody, right? And as we do that, when we talk about time, so Mao is talking about time in terms of like hours and weeks and all this other kind of stuff. My argument that I'm putting forward in this next book is that time is a measure of human consciousness for the indigenous struggle here in the Americas, right? That it's not necessarily about how much time. I mean, because if we make it into how much time, then I mean we're all messed up in the game because it's been 500 years already. Like how much time do we need, right? This is a measure. Time is as a measure of human consciousness interacts with this idea of space, right? Which is these identity politics that we're going through. But as we continue to cycle through these spaces and we continue to develop this consciousness, what happens is that if we're intentional about it, what happens is that the will of the people develops to resist, right? This is the process that I believe that we are in right now. I don't know if we've always been in it, right? I mean, in some ways we have, but I think that it is a process that's speeding up, at this particular moment. And so when we think about that and we understand that the basis of that is really coming out of this idea of protracted warfare, what we understand is that as we move through these different spaces, what we are committing ourselves to is a form of guerrilla warfare, right? We're not challenging anybody outright, but that what we simply have to do is not give up. So your question, I think, is a very good question, right? Because it's not necessarily about conserving one particular identity, but what it is about is figuring out how we move through these different spaces to continue to survive, right? And so we have a lot of, I don't know if we have a lot, that might be an overstatement, but we do have white members and Black members. And we're trying very hard we're trying very hard to eliminate the stigma of like, this is just about, Mexicans. Yeah, we get that question all the time, right? And I think it's important, I think 50 years ago, there were much clearer, the lines between communities were much clearer and they were more sharply defined. But I mean, I don't think that's true anymore at all, right? I mean, we have in the town I grew up in, there are huge families that are Black and Mexican. huge families that are white and black. I mean, it's, before you guys came, I talked a little bit about my own family and the way that, my own family is so interracially mixed. This just can't be about one group of people. Also inside of the fact that the entire planet is dying, just to throw that log on top of the fire. If we're not coming up with solutions or thinking about how this is gonna affect everybody, then we're just bullshitting. That's what I think. So, yeah, it's a good question. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have another question?
Yeah. I have
Okay,
one follow-up.
all right.
Yeah, so I guess, let me think of how to phrase this question, which is, I guess, what does the, if Chicano is already political identity, I guess the question I kind of have is, what does the end of that identity look like? And what I mean by that is, something I think is kind of interesting and kind of apocalyptic in, for example, Marxism, is that Marxism has kind of the suggestion that when it comes down to political identities, that, or ultimately the whole thing about political identities is you build them up only for their negation, right? You build up you build up the working class, you make the working class seize power. Once the working class seizes power, what does it do? Inequality stuff, right? And then when it comes down to, when it comes down to Marxist thinkers who were, feminists or who were anti-racist, right? They had ideas. You had people like, for example, Fran Fanon, at the end of his book, Black Skin, White Mask, talk about, the future of the black man is white, right? Very controversial statement, which he gets from John Paul Sartre, the Jew only existed in the anti-Semite's mind, right? But what both of them are suggesting is the idea that in a truly emancipated society, you would not have you would not have these stories of black and white. You would not have woman or man. You would not have the Jew or the non-Jew, right? You would not have these categories because they would be overcome, right, politically, right?
Yeah.
That insofar as there is a political organization for these identities, ultimately what you would hope for is, when we achieve, or the hope would be, the hope for any sort of political constituency to take power would be ultimately to end their identity altogether, for there to be some sort of universal subject. So I'm kind of curious. So I'm curious if the Raza Unida Party has any sort of conception of the future of the Chicano identity, right? Or what, in some sense, what is the end goal for the Chicano identity? Will Chicanos always exist, or will there be an overcoming of indigeneity through some sort of idea of universal subject or universal command?
It's a really good question. I don't know the answer to it. But it's a good question. I think that it would be, I can tell you from my own perspective that I think that it would be naive to think that something will always exist, right? That is not that's just, that doesn't jive with what we understand about the materiality of the world or of the universe. As far as universal subjects go, though, I don't know about that. I haven't seen anything in my lifetime that would tend to make me think that is possible, I think utopia exists for people who are in agreement with it, and it does not for those who aren't, then it becomes a dystopia, right? So it's yeah, I'm not so sure about that. I think I think Marx was absolutely right about a lot of things, but not about everything. And that might be one of the things that I don't see where that's played out at all. And of course, capitalism hasn't ended or anything like that, but and I think it's important to, your question was a really good question, right? I think it's also important to say that, and I know that you already know this, but like when they're talking about black and they're talking about white, they're talking about the construction, not the fact that of your skin color, right? But they're talking about like the construction of whiteness or the construction of blackness as we understand it, like right now. And in that sense, yeah, I would hope that those things end. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't, and I'll be honest with you, we haven't had a conversation like that or about that type of thing. within the party. So, but I mean, it could come up. You could always join and then you could bring it up in the meetings. And then we could see how that goes. That would be wild. I would love that. No, I'd be down with that. Yeah, but it would probably be yeah, that would be a good one. Yeah. That'd be awesome, actually.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Here?
All these questions lately. You know, you mentioned that, in a sense, like the party that you're sort of creating is not, in a sense, pushing for socialism at the moment, correct?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. Yeah.
But then I guess my question is more, how do we differentiate our politics of resistance? Or is there a sort of divide between the politics of resistance and the politics of emancipation here? And what I mean by that, I would say that, like, you know, if we're not really uptaking this question of socialism and all the things that we see and all the things that we feel that we're horrified by, or in sense just discontents of capitalism, how are we going to avoid creating something that just sort of, like, even if, let's say, you know, whatever willing, you know, we had a large national backing for the party, how do we avoid just falling into managing these discontents rather than say, like, negating the reality of them? You know, because like as my friend was saying here, you know, the goal essentially for, I guess, reifying or, you know, transforming identity into an object is ideally to overcome that object. So then, in a sense, if we just sort of naturalize or universalize these things, are we falling more into, like, sort of just resistance politics, or do we still feel like there's a shot at emancipatory politics?
I mean, and we talked a little bit about this, not as pointedly as your question brings out, but I think that it's important to know that within the party that we have a stated goal of liberation and I think emancipation, right? When I say that we're not working for a socialist society, that doesn't mean that might not be socialist aspects, right? Like different ways of however the economy runs, that kind of thing. Our stated goal is the end of settler colonialism. That is our stated goal. And we believe that there is a contradiction that will be resolved through that, and that it will be resolved for indigenous and indigenous descended people in the United States, or actually in North America. That's because that's the field that we claim, right? Is North America, Canada, United States, Mexico. So I think that's partially how I would answer that question. I think that the other way that we end up not just managing discontents, I think that's the word that you used, is by not doing it. I mean, and I'm not trying to be funny, you know, I mean, I think that I think that lots of times what doesn't happen is that a lot of movements don't, that they're not really intentional, you know what I'm saying, about what it is that they're gonna do. And then, you know, shit just kind of happens, man, and they let it flow over them. And the next thing you know, they're a 501c3 and you know what I'm saying? And they're like, you know, doing social work, right? That's not what we're gonna do. I mean, and I know that only time will bear that out, but that's just not what we're gonna do. I mean, we are not an organization of social workers. We are an organization of organizers and intellectuals and workers and all of that. And our goal is the end of settler colonialism and the return to history for indigenous and indigenous descended people, and the sovereignty that brings. We also don't in any way, shape, or form see that as exclusionary to other people. They may see it as exclusionary to them, but that's their decision. That's their intentional decision, right? Our intentional decision is one of inclusion. But you can't include people if they don't want to be included, right? I mean, that's a choice that they have as a human being as to whether or not they want to be a part of that. But the door is open to all. And yeah, I mean, I'm not, and I'm not dismissing your question. I think your question is important, right? But it's also a question that's kind of hard to answer at this point because it's all, you know, like not your question, but like the answer would all be speculative. Yeah, you know. So I can only answer it by saying intentionality. Yeah, you're welcome.
Mohammed?
I get one last question for you. So I thought it was really profound that you find time as a measurement of human consciousness. I think that's really profound just because it breaks this kind of notion of like time as this kind of linear thing.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when we think of time is, you know, just a mechanical rule of everything. So I guess like as strange as this question might sound, but you know, what time is it right now in the sense
Yeah.
of when it comes in regard to kind of human consciousness, I guess,
Yeah.
consciousness of positions.
Yeah.
Are we, you know, are we living in very regressive times, you know, or in comparison to when the Raza Party was first founded?
Yeah.
Back in, you know, what's it called, back in, you know, the 70s, right? Or are we kind of, you know, I guess, has time gone backwards since
Yeah.
when the Raza Party was first founded, or,
Yeah.
you know, has human consciousness developed since then?
No, I think it's developed since then. I mean, especially within our community. I know it probably, there's a lot of things, and I know sometimes people are like, oh, I don't know about that. But I mean, I think it has. And I think it's clear, you know, I think 50 years of decolonized now is, I mean, I think people are starting to be like, okay, you know, I mean, what does that mean? It's like you just asked, right? I mean, what does it mean? What does it mean to decolonize now? Right? What does it mean to stand up and do a land acknowledgement? I mean, I can tell you that sometimes when I see people do land acknowledgements, the only thing I can think is, man, we are just telling these guys over and over again that you took our land, and they're thinking to themselves, so fucking what? You know, what are you gonna do about it? You gonna take it back? I mean, and I don't think it's just the crazies that are thinking that. I think it's like a lot of white people that hear it, they're just like, whatever. You guys will never get this back, right? Because this belongs to us, you know? I mean, so I think that's part of what that's part of what we're seeing now. I think that there is a bubbling, right? There's a groundswell where people are thinking about what it means to decolonize, you know. I mean, you brought up Fanon, right? Black Skin, White Mask, great book, right? Wretched of the Earth, you know, Fanon says that colonization is a process of complete chaos, you know, it completely upsets. But what he's also saying is that decolonization or national liberation, right, which he equates those two things as the same, or he uses them interchangeably, is also a process of complete chaos, you know, because I mean, who knows what's going to happen at the end, right? It's really kind of a last man standing kind of situation, you know, who can make it to the end. And so I think yeah, I think that's where we're at, man. I really do. I'm, you know, and not, I don't have any big thing to point to or whatever. I will tell you that as somebody who is considerably older than I think probably most of you, that generationally, I think that people who are here now, you guys are so different, man. I mean, I mean, I have students that are so nice to each other, right? I mean, just so nice to each other, so concerned about the world, so pleasant to talk to, you know, so unwilling to allow people to say crazy, misogynist, sexist things. Like they just call people on them, just like bam, just like that, right? I think that is a measure. I think that's probably the most solid answer that I can give to that, right? It's not just within the Chicano community, you know, that it is yeah, that people are awakening. I mean, because there's an extinction promise that, you know, an extinction event that is on the horizon. And I think there's a lot of people that are just like, man, if it doesn't matter if you're white, you're black, whoever you are. I mean, if you live on this planet, I mean, you're going down, and so I think that's part of it. I think that's also the best way for me to answer that question. You guys yeah, okay. It's good. All right, yeah.
Anyone else? Any other questions? No? Okay, Gabe?
Well, no,
We don't get to talk to.
No. Bring it on. Yeah.
I think it was something that I appreciated, which is you're not dismissing people who may support Trump, right? Or people in the Chicano who may have voted for Trump.
Right.
And not simply dismissing them as like compromised
Yeah.
or like beyond the pale or something. And I think that's a problem the left has had in dealing with Trump, that if a worker or a person of color, whoever may support Trump, which there are.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
That it's just like, there's this tendency to just dismiss them.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that has been an obstacle to a lot of successful organizing, right? In the sense that you can't just, what did Hillary say, like the deplorables, right? The basket of deplorables. And I think a lot of the left has taken that attitude. And I just want to know how you maybe are trying to avoid that, trying to avoid dismissing people or getting into a space where we don't try to reach out to people who might be ideologically different, disagreements or that kind of thing.
I mean, in terms of the work that we're doing with the Partido, we have we've had a lot of discussions about this. I mean, people are compromised, right? I mean, they are, I mean, we're all compromised in one way or another, but a lot of people who have embraced this thing with Donald Trump, I mean, they're compromised through. I know that they would argue that it was their own conscious choice that did that to them, but I don't think that that's true. I mean, they're compromised by their material conditions, right? And if we think about like what is happening here in the United States, when people say, "Oh, it shouldn't be like this," it's like, well, no, actually, it should be exactly like this, right? Like, there's no, I mean. When you say it shouldn't be like this, you have a fantasy understanding of what the United States is, right? And we've lived in a relatively peaceful time, to be real honest with you. I mean, there is nothing new about indigenous removal. I mean, there's just not. There's nothing new about Mexican removal. I mean, it's happened numerous times in this country. And there's nothing new about rich people getting rich and other people suffering, right? I mean, so I mean, we lived in a time of relative peace, I think. And that peace is over, right? Like so what we're seeing isn't some sort of radical change in the United States or anything like that. It's just, it's just being who it is. It's like the scorpion that stings the frog on the way across the river, right? He's just like, you knew who I was when you let me on, So I think what we've kind of committed to do in terms of that is, one, understand and recognize and embrace the idea that that people are products of their environment. And that as indigenous people, not just indigenous people, but that all of us are traumatized by capitalism, that we're traumatized by the alienation, right, that we experience. I mean, it's massive, and we all have our phones, and that just contributes to alienation in a whole different way that, I mean, Marx couldn't even have begun to conceive, right? And so, we have these different things that are happening. We cannot afford to write people off, but at the same time, we can't afford to to wallow in the mud with them either, right? I mean, it's just, that's too much, man. I mean, it makes me feel bad sometimes when, I see people like that. And not feel bad for them, I mean, just feel bad, And so, that's the main thing. And I think the more that we educate ourselves, and I think the more that white people educate themselves about colonialism, the better. Because I mean, I'll tell you, as much as indigenous descendant people stand to gain through the end of settler colonialism, I think white people stand to gain a whole lot too, but in a very different way. And I think that it is for them, for the most part, a real recognition of their humanity, right? And how it is that they stand with the rest of us, not apart from the rest of us. And so, I mean, it's yeah, I mean, it's that part is, I think, is kind of deep. But it's hard to have conversations with people like that because everybody wants to blame somebody, and it was just, yeah. So we've got to figure out how to not do that. But I think in part of it is recognition. And I think that, I mean, I think that Marx still provides the best vocabulary for that. I mean, it almost provides the only vocabulary. Well, because really, when you think about it, all these right wing people, I mean, they're using, Marx's analysis, but trying to put it back, right? When they start talking about culture wars and all this other kind of stuff, I'm just like,
That's a question that kind of
figure out
came
your
up
own shit, you
in my
guys.
mind.
I mean, yeah.
And forgive me if it's already a question asked, I guess, we just weren't in the group. But I guess what does the end of settler colonialism really look like? Because I guess something that came to my mind is, when let's say, for example, when, when a white working class person might hear the word settler colonialism, they might think something like, well, what are you talking about? It's like, I didn't colonize this land. It's like I was born. It makes me think of, well, one, the Marx photo, the workers have no nation, where workers will be displaced and set up anywhere, right? There's no reason why Marx understands the worker as kind of a universal subject, because the worker, because the worker isn't defines or isn't defined through some sort of sociological category, but through his politics or through a political category, right? So when I hear the term settler colonialism, or when I hear the idea of overcoming settler colonialism, I guess the image that always comes to my mind is kind of just just a white person just asking, what are you, just a white person just being baffled, just being like, well, what are you talking about? I didn't colonize this land. I just lived here, or I don't own land, what did I do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reality is that they probably didn't do anything. You know what I'm saying? And I mean that both ways. They probably didn't do anything good, and they probably didn't do anything bad. But they had a choice as to whether or not they were going to do something good or do something bad. And I think that choice, right, is important. And I think it's important to remind them, I also think that it's particularly for that individual, that imaginary individual you're talking about, that it's important to let them know that they are not white settler colonialism, that white settler colonialism is a concept, and that it is an ideology, right? It's a hegemonic framework that rules every aspect, not just of our lives, but of their lives too. I mean, it's sold them a bill of goods, right? That tells them that they are entitled to certain things, wealth, power, right? A nice house, right? All of these things, and all of that is not. It's not true. It's in a lot. I mean, if we're really talking about, the working class, and we're talking about Marx, it's just as not true for them as in some ways as it is for us, right? Although there is an added burden when we start talking about skin color, because they're the preferred skin color at this point. So I mean, I think that's part of it. What does settler colonialism look like when it ends? I don't know. I don't. I ain't even gonna try to front on that. I mean, it's I think we're a lot closer to it than maybe we think we are. I think we're a lot closer to it than we were 50 years ago, right? But I think settler colonialism in the United States ending looks like the end of an empire. to be real honest. And I think that that is a day that is quickly coming, right? It's not a threat. You know what I'm saying? It's not this, it's not that. It's just, it's clear, man. I mean, it's coming. And I think what's really kind of ironic is that I think Donald Trump is speeding it up. I mean, I do, I mean, because he's trying to do something that is just, it can't be done. We're not the America of 1945, or the United States of 1945, right? I mean, we don't supply steel to the world. I mean, it's just, yeah. I mean, so, you look at the Chinese, right? You look at India, or even Brazil. I mean, people don't understand how big Brazil is. You can take this whole country and put it right in the middle of Brazil, I mean, and it's also a place where the wealth gaps are, very similar to the United States. So I think, what does settler colonialism look like when it's ending? I think it looks like today. I think you can look right out the window, and see that. I mean, and I think it's important, because it's an incremental event, right? The ending of settler colonialism. And we get caught up in these Hollywood moments, right? Where we see they win, right? And they raise the flag, but the movie doesn't cover the 100 years that happened before, they won and they raised the flag. So it's an incremental event. I mean, we talk about apocalypse, I think sometimes, very kind of, in abstract terms, but I mean, if you look out this window, I mean, this is what apocalypse looks like to Native people that lived here, right? This is not their world. This is their apocalypse, right? I mean, we have been living, Native descendant people have been living in a post-apocalyptic setting for the last 500 years. And it just keeps getting worse, So, we have to, I think, as we think about it, and this is one way that we are trying to approach social change within the party is really thinking about it incrementally for survival. I mean, it took 500 years to get here. I don't think it'll take 500 years to get out of it, but we ain't gonna fix it in 50 years. 50 years, that's one person's lifetime. You know what I'm saying? That's I'm not even sure I would want to live in a place where it was happening that fast. I mean, because that's going to get gruesome, man. I mean, it's going to get rough, I mean, and we see it in other parts of the world right now. And I mean, the destruction, as people go through and they're just like, this is ours, right? So, yeah, I don't know, but I do know that you can look out that window and you can see it now. You can see it crumbling. It's fraying at the edges. Yeah, it's not going to take forever.
But it can be sublime.
Yes, it can be, and it can really feel like it's
Overwhelming.
yes, and it is, because I mean, we're talking about huge forces,
Yeah.
right? That I mean, that literally shape the world that we live in. So,
All right. Thank you, Dr. Mireles.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.